They say you die twice, once when your heart stops, and once when your name is spoken for the last time. Today, no one said mine. I turned 82 this morning. I knew what the day was before I even opened my eyes. There's a weight to your birthday when you're this age. You don't wake up excited, you wake up surprised. Surprised you're still here. Surprised the walls are still the same color. Surprised your legs still obey when you swing them out of bed. I sat at the edge of the mattress, listening. The house was silent. Not the comforting kind of quiet, the kind that feels heavy, abandoned. Even the floorboards didn't creak for me anymore. No knock. No phone buzz. Not even a misfired happy birthday text from the pharmacy like last year. They forgot. At breakfast, I made my usual. Plain toast, 1 egg, black coffee. The toast tasted dry, the coffee bitter. I kept glancing at the corner of the table, the spot where Helen used to put my little birthday card every year. A homemade one, usually with a crooked heart and some joke about getting older and still being handsome. She died 9 years ago. And somehow, this year, her absence felt louder than usual. Around noon, I wandered into the living room. The light from the big window fell in long strips across the carpet. Everything looked ordinary, undisturbed. A museum of our life, gathering quiet dust. Then I looked at the wall. That wall. The one with the big family portrait, me, Helen, our 3 kids, their spouses, and the grandkids. All of us smiling in that polished, pictured A way. It was taken 10 years ago, the last time everyone was in the same room. They sent me a framed print. I hung it myself. And for a decade, it watched over this house like a proud, silent sentinel. But today, on my 82nd birthday, I took it down. No announcement. No drama. Just reached up, lifted it from the hook, and leaned it against the wall, face down. The empty patch of wall looked brighter than the rest, like it had been holding its breath beneath the frame all these years. I stood there a long time, staring at that ghost rectangle. That was my gift to myself. Silence for silence. You might think that's petty. Maybe it is. But I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I just needed something to respond to the ache. And not a loud response, just a simple one. A human one. A declaration to the air, I noticed. And yes, it hurt. The day passed like any other. I read the paper, though I barely absorbed a word. I shuffled around the backyard, checking the tomatoes. I dozed in the recliner while the TV murmured reruns of a show I once loved, but now only tolerated out of habit. Still no calls. Still no messages. When the sky turned golden and the cicadas began their evening concert, I sat on the front steps with my glass of water and tried to imagine what each of them was doing. Maggie was probably in Boston, caught up in some hospital shift. She always means well, always says she's so busy, but busy shouldn't make you forget someone's birthday. Not your own father's. Eli, my oldest, might have been out camping. He and his second wife love nature now. He sends pictures of lakes and pine trees. Never sends himself. And Lucy, God bless her, she probably remembered and meant to call. But she's always been scattered. That girl once mailed me a Christmas card in March. Still. At 7:38 p.m., the phone rang. I felt my breath catch as I shuffled to the receiver like some desperate teen before prom. It was a robocall about Medicare benefits. I laughed, loud and long, bitterly. Then I hung up. Then I cried. Before bed, I walked past the hallway and stopped again at the spot where the portrait used to hang. The absence had shape now. Wait, it looked like a window into another life. Funny, isn't it how something can be removed and somehow say more than when it was there? The next morning, I left the portrait exactly where it was. Didn't hang it back. Didn't talk about it. I just let the silence sit. Then, something odd happened. 2 days after my birthday, Maggie called. "Dad," she said, cheerful, breathless. "I'm so sorry. I meant to call on your birthday. We had an emergency at work, we lost a patient, and I forgot. God, I feel awful." I was quiet. She noticed. "Dad, I took the family portrait down," I said simply. "What?" she asked, startled. "Why?" "Because you forgot," I said. There was silence on the other end. Not angry silence. Not defensive. Just stunned. "Dad, it was one day. I made a mistake. Why would you take down the photo?" "Because it's not true," I said. "What's not true?" "That image. That perfect moment. All of us smiling. It's fiction. A picture you can point to and feel less guilty while the people in it slowly disappear. Dad, you don't get to forget me on the day I was born and still claim me on your wall." She was quiet again. Then, "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's not. Neither is growing old. Neither is outliving everyone's memory of you." That night, Maggie sent a group text to the entire family. I wasn't in the loop, but Lucy forwarded it to me later. It said, "We forgot Dad's birthday. I forgot. We all did. And he noticed. We have to do better. Not just on birthdays, but always. He's still here. And he matters." 3 days later, they all showed up. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want a pity party. But they came. Maggie drove 4 hours. Eli flew in. Lucy brought cake. They knocked. All 3 of them. Like they were afraid I'd slam the door. I didn't. I let them in. The house felt full again, like lungs inhaling after weeks of shallow breath. They hugged me too long. They over-explained. They asked how they could make it right. I didn't have answers. I just asked them to sit. And for once, for the first time in years, they did. For hours. They asked about my garden, my back pain, my books. They looked me in the eye and didn't treat me like something fading. And they noticed the wall. Maggie whispered, "Leave it down. If that's how you feel. We'll earn it back." I didn't say anything. But I didn't hang it back up. Not yet. When the doorbell rang again the next morning, I almost didn't answer. But I did. There stood Lucy, cradling a small boxed plant, a tiny peace lily, its leaves still damp. She offered it with shaky hands. "I thought maybe this could sit on your table," she said, her voice soft. I nodded and welcomed her in. Light filtered through the living room in a new way, as if the air had changed just enough to let her in. Over lemon tea, she told me how she'd been driving around town trying to remember if something else slipped between forgetting and apology. She said she hated that she made me feel invisible, like my birthday was just another day. She said birthdays mattered and fathers matter. I listened. Her words felt like brittle glass, fragile, sharp, precious. Eli arrived midday. He lugged in a cooler filled with picnic supplies, a stopgap attempt at happy memories, but enough. He rambled about traffic delays and flight cancellations, practical, apologetic, embarrassed. He admitted he'd been tracking my vitals online more than talking to me. He confessed to his phone being full of family photos of me, of the portrait, of trips we'd taken when I could still walk without thinking about it. "I didn't realize," he said, voice thick, "that having a picture out doesn't equal having a presence." Lucy interrupted with tears in her eyes. "We kept the photo up because it was easy. We didn't have to think." She turned to Eli. "We thought our presence in the picture was enough." They hovered, uncertain like children trying to avoid breaking something already cracked. But this time I spoke. "If you want to show up, you have to show up. Not just in the house. In the minutes between us when no cameras clicked. In the breath between words." They spent the day with me. We sat outside under the honey locust tree. We drank iced tea. We talked about old stories, Helen's stubbornness, the time Maggie ran off with Eli's college date, the road trip when I drove everyone to Death Valley and got lost. They laughed, sometimes stopping to ask if I remembered. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I didn't, but I told the stories anyway, because telling them mattered. I saw them lean in to catch the next detail. Their eyes met mine, and I felt seen again. By the time they left, there were no grand declarations. They wheeled the plant to the table. Maggie said, "I'll come by next week and hang that frame back up, if it's okay." I looked at the blank wall and hesitated. "It's okay," I said. "Not yet." In the days that followed, they visited more often. Eli and Lucy came together one Sunday with Lucy's homemade lasagna, which tasted like my mother's own even though I've never met her. Maggie arrived early the next morning with coffee and a promise to drive to the nursery with me. She curled up in a chair, flipping through my old journals and asking what deadlines I used to meet. I told her stories where the job didn't matter, but the people did. I told her I had always tried to protect them from the world's harder edges. Now I just wanted to let them feel safe enough to talk again. A week later, I found myself waiting at the door. Maggie nudged Mark, her husband, and told him he had to call his siblings. So he sat on the steps with his phone and texted them all at once. Dad felt forgotten. We let him down. "Want to come by?" Within an hour, the house hummed again for dinner. Mark, his wife, her parents, Eli's wife's folks, strangers once sat around my table, laughing, arguing gently over who makes better mashed potatoes. I just listened, because that's what I'd always done. Only this time they were listening back. In that kitchen, at that table, the portrait stayed face down against the wall. But no one looked at it. No one needed it. They looked at me. At 82, After a lifetime of being peripheral, I was the center of a room full of people who willingly stayed. And that mattered. One evening, late, I found a note taped to the kitchen fridge. "When you're ready, Dad will hang it back together." No names. Just that. I folded it carefully and placed it in my jacket pocket. Then came the storm. A heat wave swept through rainless days, torched lawns, and turned screens bright white. Then the power blinked. Then it went. 3 hours without AC. The house felt like a kiln. I sat in the living room, sweating, dozing in the chair. The silence wasn't deep this time. I'd hummed with absence. That night, too restless to sleep, I taped the portrait next to the empty hook. I hesitated. Were they ready? Was I? The back of the frame scraped the wall as I fixed the wire on a nail. The picture slanted slightly, off balance. I stood back. It looked different. So did I? 3 days later, Maggie appeared with a new frame, thinner, lighter, less ornate. She said she found a shop that donates profits to aging services. She said she wanted the portrait to feel like something we choose, not the burden of a perfect past. We held it together. I guided her hands as she aligned the hooks. She stepped back and stepped on a chair to set the portrait straight. Then she helped me lower the plant closer. And they left. I sat down in the dimming light and stared at Yuzel of Yuzin, that framed smile. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because smiling felt like enough. Over the next month, they visited often. Lucy taught me 2 photos apps so I could FaceTime with Helen's old friends. Eli brought a show from his camp rod-based fishing in South Georgia, called just to tell me how big the catch was. Maggie asked if I'd help her plan a trip to Nashville, her research project for hospital staff wellness. I agreed. Because I could. On the eve of my next birthday, they rang the doorbell again. I opened it to 3 envelopes. One from each of them. Each had a small card. No fancy words. "We remember. We owe you. We love you." They stood there. Smiles rung with clarity. I invited them in. We sat around again, breaking bread over lasagna that tasted like reunion. After dessert, Mark handed me a tablet. "Grandpa, record us telling your story, so we don't forget again." Tears in Maggie's eyes, applause from Lucy. They brought the camera to my chair. I swallowed. Then I said, "If they forgot my birthday, and I took down the photo, then this moment is the portrait." I told them again, life doesn't end when you stop keeping score. It ends when you stop choosing to show up. That night, after they left, I sat by the window, looking at the moon's sliver. The house felt warm. Outside, cicadas sang their closing verse. Inside, the framed portrait looked steady and real. And I felt seen. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered. The portrait stayed up, but it didn't feel like a symbol anymore. It felt like a bookmark. A way to say, we paused here. We noticed. Now we go on together. I started writing again. Not long pieces. Not anything polished. Just fragments, jottings. Sometimes a line or two about what the air smelled like. Sometimes whole pages about Helen's voice, the way she hummed off-key while cooking, or how her hands never stopped moving, always folding, smoothing, sorting something. Writing became less about preserving and more about proving. I'm still here. Then something happened I didn't expect. They began sending me their stories. Eli emailed me a letter he wrote, but never sent, about how he feared becoming a father because he didn't think he could match mine. Maggie mailed me a photo album filled with sticky-noted memories. Lucy sent voice messages of her kids telling jokes that made no sense, but made me laugh anyway. One day, I got a package from Zadie, Lucy's daughter. Inside was a drawing of Grandpa's wall. On one side was the family portrait. On the other, me, sitting in my chair, smiling, with a balloon over my head that read, "You are seen." I put it on the fridge. In November, something inside me shifted. The fatigue I'd chalked up to age became harder to ignore. I'd rise late, sit down early, and still feel like something was pulling me down into the floor. The doctor ran tests. The results weren't urgent, but they weren't kind either. "Mild cardiac decline," he said. "Manageable, but we need to monitor." He said it gently, but what I heard was, "You've begun to dim." I went home and stared at my porch, at the leaves Helen used to rake into perfect piles. They hadn't been touched in weeks. Just scattered. Decaying. I didn't cry. I just felt tired. That night, I wrote a letter to each of them again. But unlike the last ones, these weren't apologies. They were thank yous. For remembering. For returning. For choosing me again. I didn't say goodbye. I just said, if I forget one day, You'll remember for both of us. Then came Christmas. The house was fuller than it had been in years. The grandkids ran through the hallways like they owned the place. Someone knocked over a lamp. Someone else spilled cider on the rug. Mark lit a fire too early and smoked out the den. It was chaos. It was joy. It was alive. I sat in my chair, the portrait hanging steady above me, and watched them. Not through a lens, not through a frame, but with eyes that knew the difference between absence and presence. Lucy came to me and asked, "Do you want to say something before dinner?" I did. So I stood, slowly, carefully, painfully, and I said, "You forgot my birthday this year, and I forgave you. Not because forgetting doesn't matter, but because remembering after matters more. You came back. You brought yourselves. Not just smiles, not just calls, but your full, messy, imperfect selves. And that more than anything just the gift." They were quiet, even the kids. Then Maggie stepped forward and kissed the top of my head. "Thank you for staying," she whispered. I nodded, because staying was a choice. After they left, I kept the lights on longer. I let the TV run into the early morning. I walked slower through the house, touching doorknobs and shelves like they were relics of a life that had finally caught up with me. And then I sat down in the dark, one hand on the armrest, one hand on my chest, feeling every beat. In January, the snow came. Heavy, quiet, thick like memory. I watched it pile on the windowsills, softening the corners of everything. A hush covered the world. Zadie called to read me her poem about snowflakes and how each one carried a secret. "Do you know yours, Grandpa?" she asked. "I think I do," I said. "What is it?" "That I was never invisible. I just waited for you all to look again." I began recording myself, my stories, my questions, my memories, my fears. I didn't know if they'd ever listen, but I knew that I had. To myself. At last. In February, the family surprised me with a celebration. Half birthday, Lucy called it. There were cupcakes, balloons, a banner made of recycled grocery bags painted with the words, "We remember now." They hung it beside the portrait. We took a photo. Not perfect, not polished, just real. I didn't smile wide, but I smiled, because this was the portrait that would last longer than the frame. March arrived like an apology. Cooler mornings, slower days, birds returning with cautious song. My hands had grown clumsier. I dropped a bowl and didn't bother sweeping the pieces right away. It was the first time I'd let something stay broken for a few hours just to see if anyone would notice. Zadie did. She was visiting with Lucy that Saturday and stopped mid-sentence to pick up the pieces. "You okay, Grandpa?" she asked. I didn't lie. "I'm tired a lot." She nodded, serious in the way only 10-year-olds can be. "Being remembered is hard work, huh?" I smiled at her. "Staying here is." In the months that followed, my days got quieter. Not lonelier, just more still. The family came regularly now. Not with grandeur, just with presence. Someone would sweep the porch. Someone else would water the plants. Lucy taught me how to play Wordle, then called me every morning to do it together. Sometimes I forgot where I was in the middle of a sentence. I'd start a memory and realize halfway in that I was describing a dream instead. But no one corrected me anymore. They just listened. They let me wander. And sometimes they followed me there. One Sunday afternoon, Eli brought over a projector. We set it up in the backyard, hung a white sheet between the oak trees, and watched old home videos. The kind Helen used to film with her big camcorder, the kind that shake and blur and make everyone look 10 years happier than they remember. I watched my younger self on the screen, holding Maggie up to touch tree branches. Helen laughing behind the camera. Eli holding a worm like it was treasure. I sat between all three of them now. Older, faded, but more present than ever. After it ended, no one said anything for a while. Then Mark whispered, "I didn't know you were that kind of dad." "What kind?" I asked. "The kind that stayed," he said. In April, Maggie wheeled me into a new exhibit at the local library. Portraits of Aging, it was called. Black and white photos of elderly men and women, each with a quote beneath their face. One read, "I don't want to be remembered as wise, just real." Another, "We're not fading, we're ripening." I stood in front of one for a long time. A man about my age. Deep lines, soft eyes. His quote said, "The trick is to leave before the picture changes you too much." I didn't agree. I wanted to stay until the last possible frame. That same week, I asked Maggie to help me record one final thing. She brought her phone. I asked her to sit across from me, but not to look directly. Just listen. Then I began. My name is Arthur. I was born on a cold February morning. I've outlived my wife, my parents, my brothers, and nearly my name. This year, my children forgot my birthday. I didn't remind them. I just removed the portrait. Not out of spite, out of grief. But they came back. Not with flowers, but with time. And what I've learned, now, is that time is the apology. Not gifts, not words, presents. You don't need to make a speech for someone you love. You just need to show up on the day they think they've been forgotten. In May, I had a fall. Not a bad one. No broken bones. Just a slip in the hallway and a bruised ego. Lucy found me. I was sitting upright, but breathing hard. She didn't panic. She didn't fuss. She just sat down next to me on the floor. You still matter, you know, she said. Even on the floor? I teased. Especially on the floor, she said. It was strange, realizing I was no longer afraid of forgetting. Because even if I lost the thread, they had picked it up. Even if I stepped away, they'd keep the door open. Even if I left, the picture remained. One morning in June, I woke up and didn't recognize the ceiling. It took me a full 2 minutes to remember where I was. Then I saw the frame. The portrait. Still hanging. I got up, walked toward it, stood beneath it in my slippers. I reached out, touched each face, named each name aloud. I only forgot one. Zadie's little brother. The newest one. Only 2 years old. I whispered, "You'll have to remind me later." That night, I wrote a final letter. To all of them. If you're reading this, it means you still care. And if you still care, then I've never really left. This house was never a mausoleum. It was a waiting room for memory. You came back. That's more than most. When I took down the portrait, I wasn't erasing you. I was daring you to see me. Thank you for looking. Thank you for staying. Thank you for seeing me, even when I didn't see myself. On the morning of my 83rd birthday, the doorbell rang before sunrise. I opened it. There stood Zadie. She had a new drawing. This one was me, sitting on a cloud, holding a photo frame, smiling. At the bottom, in big block letters, she'd written, "You are still here." I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I was full. Completely, beautifully full. And that's the real ending, isn't it? Not the silence. Not the forgetting. But the day you stopped needing the picture to prove you were part of it. The day I forgot Dad's birthday felt like the day I lost part of myself. I told myself I was busy. Work was a storm I couldn't calm. The kids were loud, relentless. The house was a mess. But the truth? I just didn't want to face him. Not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't know how. I remember the silence after I got his text. Remove the family portrait. For words that felt like a glass breaking inside me. I stared at the phone for minutes. Then I called Maggie. "We have to fix this," she said. "But how?" The next morning, I drove to Dad's house with a peace lily in my hand and a nervous knot in my stomach. He opened the door. Older, smaller, different, and yet the same. His eyes so tired but still sharp held mine for a long second. "I thought maybe this could sit on your table," I said, holding out the plant like an offering. He nodded, invited me in. Over lemon tea, the conversation started slow. "I'm sorry," I said. His lips twitched, almost a smile. "You don't have to be sorry for forgetting," he said. I shook my head. "I do. Because I want to remember. But I'm scared sometimes. Scared that if I look too hard, I'll see how much time we lost." He took a deep breath. "It's never about how much time you have. It's about what you choose to do with it." That day, I stayed longer than planned. We talked about Helen, his late wife, like she was sitting right there, smiling with us. I learned how much he missed being seen not as a grandfather or a father, but as a person. Not as a memory, but as a presence. Days turned into weeks. I started visiting more often. I helped him with chores he'd been putting off. We planted flowers in the backyard. I taught him how to use FaceTime. And he taught me how to slow down. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said something I never forgot. "You're carrying a lot, Lucy. Don't let it bury you." I looked at him, puzzled. He smiled. "Sometimes, the people who seem the strongest are the ones who need the most care." That night, I called my siblings. We need to be here. For him. For each other. I realized that remembering Dad's birthday wasn't about a date on the calendar. It was about presence. About showing up. About the courage to face the past, the regrets, the silences, and choose to connect anyway. At the family gathering that followed, I watched Dad carefully. He wasn't the same man from the old photos. He was someone new, someone who had survived loss and loneliness and come back to us stronger, someone who had taught us what it truly means to be family. The portrait was back on the wall, but it wasn't the centerpiece anymore. We were together, and that's when I finally understood. Sometimes, the hardest part of love is learning to see, not just with your eyes, but with your heart.